Everybody is in the cell, and you well? All right. Mr. Chair, prior to lunch, the parliamentary representative for St. Michael's West, who I believe is a significant other as a parliamentarian in these chambers, based on the example of the long ancestry connected to the business world all through the days of troubled dark waters. His family was able to open a business in the 1920s. And as I said in these chambers before, at the time there were theoretical and philosophical guidelines on why black businesses ought to emerge and take their rightful place, especially in a country with a 98 or so, 90, somewhere between 95 to 99% black people. You know, I will never stop making this point because everybody runs away from it. So it has to be made, and his family survived at a time, especially in the most recent period of the last 25 or so years. We have seen a whole body of black business collapse or undermine. And I believe, while he might speak about participatory observation, both historically and currently, as a businessman, I believe that we too should have some theoretical basis for doing what we do in terms of social reform, and even social reform with a strong revolutionary spirit. And I want to compliment the minister for the work that he has done, especially in relation to vending, because vending emerged out of the slave codes of the 17th century. And with all the governments that we have had, both colonial and black governments, nobody had the courage to even tinker in an effective way with the statutory provisions related to vendors. And I want to compliment this minister, but I also want us to be very clear on what we want to do. I'm not saying it must be the exclusive responsibility of us to protect businesses, especially black business in Barbados. I'm not going to say that, because the people who will cut your throat is the very black people that you're talking about. I'm saying that I've watched too many persons in my time, black people collapse, and they had businesses that some people would not even describe as medium-sized businesses or even micro businesses. And certainly they would not attach anything like the stereotype vendors to the kind of business that we have had. I think that we have a responsibility, sir, to restore the trends that occur prior to probably the 1980s. Prior to the 1980s, I would love to see that we protect the interests of businesses like Jose. I want us to talk about the protection and the sustaining of black business, especially in the form of bees cycling. and to work with these people. Look, I've seen NASA crumble. I've seen Joe Clark, who deceased, Trevor Clark, crumble. I've seen big struggles in law courts, outside of law courts, and at the end of the day, black business is the victim. I would like to see, especially in my time, that we introduce not just social reform or even economic reform, but there's no real affirmative action for wider distribution of the wealth or opportunities for our own people. Government is meaningless, especially black government, who have been given the opportunity from 1951. It is meaningless and useless if we preside over the destruction of our own people. So I am one of those people who would love to see us courageous enough not only to make the contemporary progressive changes that we have seen in the recent pieces of social legislation, the Vendors Act, and you know, the thing about the Vendors Act, the people who made the major contributions to the changes in the Vendors Act is the people themselves, the vendors. And it tells me another thing, but that's why I say the narrative, the language has to change. I've been hearing people saying, we have to put in place training programs for them. If you were privileged to hear, I don't want to call any specific persons there, if you were privileged to hear the contributions from the vendors, you don't have to put any training program for business, because they're not even categorized as business. And a change of legislation is not going to make that happen. The vendors are far more intelligent than many persons, so don't come in here and tell me that these people are trained in dollars and cents and basic arithmetic, and they're incapable of understanding anything that these people, most of them went to secondary schools, and I heard them articulating themselves in this very room and publicly. A man narrating what they call a short story, a poem for about over half hour without a note, who was the president of the vendors. You can have any small business course. Sorry, I didn't know I was going so far. But the point is, first of all,
do you have any questions?
Sir, is it necessary for us to have a training course in small business? What are the areas, the tenets of that training course that you cannot, for vendors, that you cannot put in a training course for small businesses in Barbados? What it is about it that is different?
If that is the question, again, some feedback. If that is the question, Honourable Member, then I could say to you that there's no distinction between that course which you would give to any small business person and that which you would give to a vendor. But to simply answer you that way would do a terrible injustice, in my estimation, to the philosophical underpinnings of your question. And I am sorry that time got the better of you, because you were elaborating in a manner that I think was not just fulsome, but very relevant. You began on the question of the vendor's bill. The vendor's bill, quite rightly, could be described as an empowering impulse, an instrument which creates an empowering impulse for the vending community in Barbados, for all the reasons that you outlined and more. In my judgment, one of the things that it also does is it served to remove the scare of criminality, which has damaged the psyche of working class Barbadians, so that a legitimate form of commercial activity, which existed in this country for 400 years, was seen as something that you should go to as a last resort, simply because of the fact that there has been so much bad treatment associated with it. And there are so many people who have found themselves, including those who would have come to give evidence before us, in the hands of the law, on the wrong side, rather, of the law. And so therefore, by removing all previous convictions associated with vending, we went a step further, and this perhaps is not said often enough, we went a step towards repairing the damage to the psyche of the people that we are representing. I think, Honourable Member, that succinctly your question takes us to the point of the financial literacy program. I want to begin by saying to you that the financial literacy program, in my judgment, is relevant to this country as a whole. There are people of the profession that I am part of, which is the legal profession, who desperately need to benefit from the financial literacy program because some of them have reduced themselves to being common thieves. There are equally, Mr. Chairman, persons in the accounting profession who desperately need to benefit from the financial literacy program because their professional credibility has been called into question by virtue of the tarnished and disreputable way in which they have treated to some of their clients. None are to be excused. None are to be carved out. What we are trying to do with the financial literacy program is to move a community of Barbadian people in a Barbadian society to respect the importance of being able to conduct commercial and business-related activity in accordance with prudential requirements, best practices, and understanding of what the standards and so on related to the activities are. Some of these issues, Honourable Member, transcend all types of activity. The vendor is concerned about managing his debt, and the vendor is concerned about costing his product. Equally, the owner of the supermarket is concerned about managing his debt and costing his product. There's no distinction between them. What is important is that equally they must be at a table where they are able to benefit from assistance in navigating some of the challenges and pitfalls that come your way in the conduct of business. They must be able, all must be able, in a society where we know many are born and live with a disability enforced upon them by social constructs and social considerations like class, color of skin, those kind of considerations what I'm talking about. So that therefore, if you are a black business person of a small or micro business type, you don't really have anybody to turn to get the assistance. That is why the state has to intervene to provide that guiding and helping hand. Unfortunately, that is still a requirement in Barbados today. You speak about affirmative action, and I could not agree with you more. Affirmative action has to come by way of viable and tangible programs that make sense to ordinary people who are leading ordinary lives. That is why the point that Minister Husband spoke about the collateral registry is one that is near and dear to my heart. We are talking about now moving a community of business people. Most of them will be micro and small, to a stage where they no longer have to depend on borrowing money on the basis of their ownership of real estate. And in every constituency of this country, it means that every one of us represent people in some form or fashion where they are doing business, but they are not the owners of the land where the business is done. There are people who may be farmers who are renting land. It don't make them less of a farmer. It just means that they don't own the land. They can't face the credit union or the bank with the title deeds to the land. But does that mean that they should be forever bereft and deprived of an opportunity to borrow money and access credit, even though the sector cries out for more financing? the sector cries out for more opportunity to be given to its members? The answer is no. So we have to find a way to work around the system that we are saddled with. And what the collateral registry seeks to do is to bring us to a point where intangibles, first of all, like the intellectual property of our poets and our cultural exponents and those people in the creative sector generally, accounts receivable, for example, those people who are doing cosmetology and they have 40 and 50 people waiting outside of their salon every Saturday morning. They have accounts receivable because they have a clientele that is there every single week of the year. They see more businesses, more people coming through their door than some doctors do in Barbados. But do they have access to the same level of credit or opportunities to access credit? The answer is no. So we have to find a way to correct that. We have to find a way, Mr. Chairman, to deal, again, I give the example of the farmer who has his crops, and the crops are assets which have value. And we have to find a way of making sure that those crops can be utilized in the context of their being assets as credit against money that they are borrowing from some entity. And that is the journey that we must now go on with a view to unleashing the financial and economic potential of this country, and at the same time nurturing small and micro businesses which are starved of credit in an economy which has been not only afflicted by bad management prior to this administration, but quite frankly also by a pandemic and global circumstances which are continuing to impact us, such as those I opened on with regard to the energy sector globally today. And these things are very real and they're very relevant because all of them combine to make life a little bit more difficult for our small and micro business people in particular. So that, Honourable Member, I take your point with regard to the affirmative action. I want to use the opportunity to speak, Mr. Speaker.
Also take the point and ask you to
Yes, and in doing so, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to make sure that you have the fullest possible answer, and I wanted to go back to this question of debt, because the question of debt and equity and managing debt, I say again, is a burning and vexing issue that we are not talking about in Barbados. The supervisor of insolvency, I believe, sir, had run out of time or steam, but I genuinely feel that this is an opportunity for her to speak to the issue, because the Honourable Member's question cannot properly be answered if we do not treat to the question of our debt management strategy at the level of the ministry. Ms. Esther Springer, please take a mic.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I want to apologize for this morning to my minister and to my fellow colleagues. I was, in fact, feeling a bit bashful, and as such may have done a disservice to the area. The question raised in relation to, the comments made in relation to the importance of training for our vendors, for our small business people, based on what we are seeing, it is quite necessary. In fact, our office was in full support of the formation of the Financial Literacy Bureau. As part of our mandate, we are required to document the causes of bankruptcy and insolvency and what we are seeing in our businesses. We recognize especially, and I didn't want to really refer to race, but we see an exponential increase in our black businesses coming before us. They are unaware of, as the minister spoke of, the ability to cost their products. They are unaware of their statutory obligations in relation to tax, to national insurance, the obligations in relation, if they are employers, in terms of calculating vacation pay. And these are things that have strangled the businesses from the outset. The COVID-19 pandemic, what it did is to further reveal a lot of our businesses were already skating on the edge. What we are seeing now is a situation where we recognize that our people we need to change a culture. We are not treating the area as important as it should. We have situations where when clients come to us under the Dealing with Debt program, and we try to recognize, as we go through their financial affairs and we look at cost savings, we realize that they are unaware of the charges in terms of the banks. When they look at their savings, they're seeing deductions of $4.50 per point of sale or $3 at the ATM. And they were unaware that these charges existed. We need to educate our people. The emphasis or the importance, Minister Cadell spoke of economic enfranchisement. And it struck me as, and she had queried what our ministry intended to do in terms of seeing our businesses move from small to medium to large. But we need a whole government approach. There is a fracture, we are fractured. Our taxation policies, our enforcement policies in relation to both NAS and taxation need to be adjusted to facilitate. We had a situation recently where in order to collect our taxes, their businesses were assessed for periods if they had not been registered. What ended up, we had a flood of persons coming to our office trying to determine how they were going to deal with the debt that they had to deal with. In order to get certain concessions, you need a clearance. In order to take advantage of certain benefits, you have to, even with regards to the annual filings, because our people are unaware of some of these things, because they need to be educated. And it's not just, we can't start at the level, we deal with persons who are already in a financial crisis. But these problems are systemic and need to be dealt with even at the level of our schools in terms of what we teach our children. Our people are risk averse. So when we speak of introducing topics and training on investment, we need to recognize that we need to start at the very, very beginning. Their spending habits, corporate governance in our businesses. We have business people who are highly skilled, but they're only functionally illiterate. We have clients that cannot read, write, or spell, but they own a business. So yes, training is necessary. How are we going to address these issues if we don't recognize that the area is important and that the training is needed?
Ma'am, you have to wrap up your answer at this point. Thank you.
What I will say is, in our effort to ensure that we have a fair and balanced personal and corporate insolvency regime, which not only promotes investor confidence, but also supports economic growth, we recognize that programs such as our soon-to-be launched Money Smart program is necessary, which is basically aimed at educating our people about the implications as they try to take advantage of financial services products. We need to educate our people, and that is necessary as we try to deal with debt. The stigma associated with debt and financial failure within this region is so great. People file for bankruptcy in the USA as a matter of course, and they move on and they have that fresh start. Any individual filing for bankruptcy, they will never in life get a loan in Barbados, although after a period of time it is supposed to go off their record. And that is why the Fair Credit Reporting Act is so important as well. So we need to address these issues together as not just the Ministry of Energy and Business Development, but as an entire government. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair? Sorry. I just wanted to finish answering the representative for St. Michael East. May I?
You may proceed, ma'am.
Yes, thank
Honourable
you.
Minister.
I understand the concern that he has, because this is something that has been happening in Barbados for a very long time. But I just want to give some support to what the Honourable Member for St. James Central said, and the excellent presentation that was just made by Ms. Springer. The truth is, our people do not learn about business around the dinner table. It's not passed from generation to generation. each one starts fresh. There are only a handful that have a generational path that passes on business acumen, business practice. And so this puts them at a severe disadvantage. And this is why it is being said that training and the support that we offer will help to buttress or to fill that gap that is there. But another thing that the business development unit does, the business development part of the ministry does, is the issue of cooperatives and clusters. Now, why is that important? So often our families may not support us. They wish us well, but they do not give the kind of support that you find in other racial communities when it comes to business. A person may have some money and they will not invest a cent to help you get your working capital. If you get put in court for debt, they'll bring the money then, but not give it to you ahead of time that you can make a success of your venture. And this is the reality. And therefore, the work that is being done in this ministry, in terms, for example, with the trust loan funds, they've started clusters. That is to give people a tribal group in which they can support and nurture each other, and where they can exchange experiences, where they can share best practices, where they can feel that level of support as they journey as an entrepreneur. And this is work that we intend to expand and intensify, and to be able to include as well as many of the family members that will come along to support a small business, because that is what is needed. That's the transformation. We must do this until business is dinner talk table in every house in this country. The second area is the area of the cooperatives. And this is something that we do not do well. We use team. Our culture teaches us to use team for emotional support, for entertainment, for laughter, for doing things with each other. But we don't do team to perform. We don't do team to achieve. We don't do team for business. And this is a tremendous weakness that we have within our culture. So what is needed is for us to be able to do the hand-holding that is necessary in helping people to form first the clusters as a baby start, and then to help them graduate to cooperatives, where we're pooling our resources, we are pooling our purchasing power, we are leveraging our numbers in a way that will help us to be able to build good businesses. And the cooperatives department in this ministry has been able to sign up, I believe, an additional 3 cooperatives this year. But it's something that we want to broaden and intensify. Why? Because if we are going to get our businesses to export, they may have to do it using a cooperative method in order to build the scale that they need and to be able to take on a regional market. This is going to be vital. So this is going to be a central part of what we're going to be doing in the ministry to help empower all Barbadians of whatever color or stripe to be able to be good entrepreneurs and to have the hope of being able to build a business that will live long after them. And that is the commitment that we in this ministry are making to the people of Barbados and to this Parliament. I thank you, Chair.
Honourable Member St. Michael Rees.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make it unequivocal. I never suggested at any point that training is not important. All I was saying is that the course, you don't have to have a specific training course for vendors, especially since I'm hearing the word small business people interchange sometimes with vendors. It is only when there's a psychological scar that you have that you begin to separate or compartmentalize small businesses, and you begin to talk about a special course for vendors. And I think the minister made it very clear, but I was surprised to see that he probably was not as clear as he ought to be, because some persons seem to be suggesting that I am saying there's no need for small business. The other point I want to make before I answer the question is I'm hearing about this entrepreneur. Sometimes when people talking and trying to roll poetry, I get a little confused because the old classical economist said an entrepreneur was a man that was born. He had special qualities and he knew how to combine the factors of production. So therefore, this separated the entrepreneur from labor itself. But the fact that we're talking so much about we don't have a culture of a specific kind, we could not fit into the category of what is an entrepreneur according to the old classical economists. So that is why I say we need to have a new language, a new vision, a new narrative when we begin to talk about these generalizations, that in some cases those generalizations are also stigmatized as well. Sir, I believe that it's all right to be trained well in these specific areas, but people train you because they want you to perpetuate the standards and the guidelines which they have given to you. So I am really asking that we begin to think on the struggles that we have been through. If you're going to talk about business people, can the government assert itself in relation to the manner in which financial institutions, banks, and other lending agencies, the same way that we have thought about having a lending agency in the form of the trust loans. I'm just saying that there can be a modification of the functions of these institutions, and sometimes government might be forced to take a lead. I know we don't have any Barbados National Bank like before, but once we had financial institutions owned by the state investing even in the colonial countries. We don't have those, you don't have the National Bank anymore, but can be a little more assertive, especially when young men and women is in need or run into some difficulty, because most of the time when a man invests a little 5,000 or 10,000 in a business, in the early days, he also takes out what he considers as profit, which is no more than some cash to replace the stock. He takes it out and utilizes it, and you see the stock diminishing at a rapid rate, and then he has no money in the banking system. But can we have either the same training course, or can we make arrangements with the bank that if somebody has a long historical record of success, although they don't have capital available to us, some new forms of analysis must be applied. A man running a business for 20-something years or so runs into difficulty, and because he does not have the reserves, the capital in the banking system, or even available to him in cash in hand, he cannot access a loan although he has a successful business record. Can't we assert ourselves in the institutions, the financial institutions, and try to see if under these circumstances, and that's why I say there must be a theoretical and a philosophical basis. You have banking institutions only coming to make large profits with no great interest in the development of the country. We suffer these circumstances. I would like to see small overdraft facilities, sir. So I'm asking, can the state, I would like to see that. I would like to see an attitude and a reduction in the use of the word vendor as much as possible, or a new definition that must follow the term. If I say vendor, I can say small business, a category of small business. But I think that the statutory provisions that we have seen with the vendors, and also with the recent change with the liquor license and the whole decriminalization, decolonization process, I think it is saying that we are on a specific trajectory, as I heard the minister say, and I'm hoping that the bureaucracy will be on board with us based on the same philosophical theories. I don't know if that is a question or a worthwhile comment.
I believe I detected the question that was located somewhere in the statement. I thank the honourable member for his passion and dedication to this issue. Honourable member, I would say to you that the battle with the banks and their way of operating is one which I will agree has to be a whole of government approach. My immediate interface is not with the banking sector, and so I have to give way to the minister in the Ministry of Finance and to the Minister of Finance herself in terms of the direct interface with the banks. But I think that we are all on the same page when it comes to the performance of the banks in Barbados. When I speak about the collateral registry, I am speaking about a way of bypassing, in large measure, the orthodoxy that has allowed the banks to do the things they do to poor people in this country. That orthodoxy has at some stage to be confronted in Barbados, and is not being confronted just for the sake of confrontation. It is being confronted in the name and in the sake of development. If I go to Africa and the leading countries in that developing part of the world, there is in fact a collateral registry to be found, for example, in places like Ghana. If I go to Latin America, in the leading developing countries on that continent, there is a collateral registry to be found in all of these places. What does it do? It gets us away from the orthodoxy which says unless you hold bricks and mortar, unless you have real estate, you're not going to be easily able to access capital, which is necessary. Every business on earth, I do not know of any, functions on the basis of access to capital. And if you don't have that access to capital, you are struggling and almost committed to starve. The ability to register the assets that you do have, whether they are intangible assets or whether they are tangible assets, your office equipment, your plant and machinery, your vehicles, all of those things. I gave you an example of some of the intangibles, the intellectual property and your accounts receivable, etc. And your ability to register those assets as security to enable you to borrow money is what we're talking about. It allows for us to create, as only government can create, a new theater of activity and of opportunity for businesses in Barbados and business people who are unincorporated to be able to confront a financier, which may well be the credit union, it may not be the bank, but to be able to say to that financier, I can give you some security to hold on to, and in exchange for your holding that security, give me a loan of X amount of dollars. That is the simple challenge that we have to confront. And we've got to navigate our way around that to find a solution. The issue has bedeviled this country from as far back as the memory of man doth run. And until we face the facts, you call a few names of businessmen. When I hear them talk, honourable member, I have heard them all come to the point of financing. It is the bugbear. It is the thing that bedevils all of them. And it has bedeviled this generation of business person too. And it falls to us in the ministry at this time to find a solution. I believe that the collateral registry discussion is now far advanced. I am happy that the alignment of the ministry is now such that the corporate registry falls under our umbrella. I sit at this meeting with 2 permanent secretaries as party to a discussion that we had with the Registrar of Corporate Affairs only a few days ago, not in preparation for this meeting, but in advancement of the work of the collateral registry. And we are, yes, there may still be a little daylight, to be absolutely frank with you. There's still a little daylight between us as to how we're going to achieve it. But what we are trying to achieve, we are on the same page. And the methodology we are going to use to achieve it, the daylight is diminishing rapidly. And I am pleased to say that this is a work in progress. I anticipate, in all honesty, that within the next 2 to 3 months, and it's a very difficult thing for a politician to sit down and give a commitment, especially to the House. So I'm not going to give a commitment, but it is my anticipation that within the next 3 months or so, we should be able to have worked through all the technical difficulties that we have. because we have identified places which are useful as precedents where it happens. Right here in the English-speaking Caribbean, there is a country where it exists, Jamaica. They have not perfected it, but they have started it. And my contention is that there's no reason why we cannot get it off the ground in Barbados as well. I will be the first to concede that one of the challenges that we have to treat to is the requirement for there to be a well-developed secondary market. If I say, for example, go back to the farmer, once you have securitized the crops and lent the money against the crops, if the worst came to the worst and you were not able to deliver the kind of repayment that you should be able to make, then if you're not honoring that repayment schedule, I should be in a position to dispose of or reassign the ownership of those crops to somebody else. That has to be done within the context of a secondary market, which we can create. It is not beyond us. And where I am happy to be is at a point where all of my technical officials understand that this is not beyond us. We do these things. Crops are transferred every day in Barbados. Cars are transferred every day in Barbados. Assets are moved between parties privately every day in Barbados. What we have not done is to put it within the context of saying we're going to do this and treat to it to help small and micro and medium-sized business people, specifically because of the fact that the banks are not flexible enough and are too risk-averse to help those same people.
Honourable,
That is what we have not been able to do, but that's what we must do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable member, any further questions?
My next question is, if we continue to increase production in Barbados, is there any policy in place for us? I know that this might cross ministries, Ministry of Foreign Affairs might even be involved. Is there any policy that we have that we can tap into external markets? There was a time when we were talking about, I know we don't have much mahogany trees like before, but one and we were talking a lot about exporting mahogany furniture into Britain and exporting craft into yes, Britain and the United States of America. I don't know what is responsible for that not being taken place. But I also know, sir, that if you go to Latin America, or you even go to, in fact, Canada, UK, or those are the three, or UK or USA markets, you will go into a supermarket and you will see West Indian produce. A lot of hard cane fruits and vegetables that I've never seen in my life anywhere in the Caribbean. I'm not putting on any specific exporters
Honourable member,
or country.
you've given reasonable latitude in your previous two questions.
Well,
Could you
okay,
please
so I didn't know
close
what
the question?
again, probably is my bad habit. I want to know what are the ambassadors doing in these markets overseas to help open up economic opportunities for our businessmen in Barbados, so that we don't always have to rely on the small demand from the Barbadian economic market or business market. Because as I was just trying to paint a picture earlier, I want to know what are the agencies that are helping us to be able to get an opportunity like United States, like Canada, like all the metropolitan countries. They see opportunities, turn all other markets into consumer markets. Where are our consumer markets that we can export items to, and what are the agencies that are responsible for opening up opportunities in the external markets?
Thank you, Chair. I'll respond to the Honourable Member for St. Michael East. there was a time when the Barbados government was in the fortunate position of having sufficient funds to be able to strategically place BIDC personnel in our high commissions and embassies around the world to focus specifically on the marketing of Barbadian goods and services in their various jurisdictions. When we went through the financial crisis of 2008 and beyond, it led to a reduction of those personnel from out of those markets. What we've been doing in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, last year, we started focusing on the creation of a commercial diplomacy network. And the aim here was first to take all of our missions and train them in commercial diplomacy so that it goes beyond one person in a mission, that you would have at least 2 or 3 persons who could work together on the effective promotion of goods and services from Barbados. Then what we wanted to be able to establish then was to have the Ministry of Industry, through its unit BIDC Export Barbados, to look and identify what are those key or critical goods, what are those critical services that Barbados could focus its financial resources and technical resources on that provide the very best opportunity for us to build up export. And so Export Barbados has been working assiduously on it, and you'll hear from the minister who has responsibility for it share with you in more detail about what they're going to be doing. One of the things that we are looking at via COTED, which would be the council that looks at trade and development, that's an organ of CARICOM. And what we're doing is looking at how can we open the regional market now. Right now, we have hundreds of millions of dollars of goods that are imported into this region when those goods are actually produced in this region. And we have not been able to get a transition of our importers to shift from the extra-regional goods and to begin to give support to the regional goods, which would give Barbadian goods an opportunity across the region. So what we've been working on just before we had elections, we had put a position, Barbados had put a position that we needed to trigger our SIMSU Pro. It is a digital network that will allow all of our manufacturers, all of our producers to put online in a portal what they produce, etc. And this would be made available now to the importers across the region, and it will help to support a Buy CARICOM program. And that way, we could actually shift some of that money that is now leaking away from the region and transfer it to the goods in the region. But what will make this work? You have to have a consumer education program. If you don't get your population to understand the importance of supporting their own goods, the importance of supporting regional goods, that when they do that, they're safeguarding their jobs, they're safeguarding the revenue that government can get to provide the services which they need. If you can't get your importers to appreciate that in order for consumers to have money to spend with them, they have to help protect their jobs too. And that they do it by how and where they direct their financial resources. Whose product are you buying? And this is why the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast would have tasked the Cabinet and the Ministry of Tourism to look at the linkages between the Barbadian products and what is being consumed in the tourism product, all to stimulate the additional support, the additional market for all of our goods and services, because with the best will in the world, 12,000 businesses cannot all become profitable and keep growing profit selling to 300,000 people. It won't happen. Can't work. We have to export. And that is why the focus for Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we have commercial attaché in
Honourable
Ghana.
Minister, please wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. I'll wrap up now. And a group just returned from Guyana, where they're looking at the opportunities there. So whether it's in Africa, whether it's in CARICOM, we are looking for those places, and we're actively engaging our teams from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to help us do that. I'm obliged to you, Chair. Mr. Chair, I believe Ms. Esther Lord Graham from Fund Access can also lend some information on what is being done to help our small businesses to get more market share, more business. Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon. My name is Esther Lord Graham. I'm General Manager of Fund Access. At Fund Access, we have some clients that are engaged in the export market. This is mostly along the lines of condiments and vegetables in terms of the breadfruit that is being exported right now. One of the major problems with exporting One of the major problems with small businesses exporting is the quantum that some persons require. For instance, if you want to export to London, to a Tesco, you have to be able to fill all the brands, all the locations of that Tesco supermarket. If you're going to export to Marks and Spencer's, you have to do the same thing. What needs to happen is that there needs to be a consortium of sorts where some assistance is given to these small business people to fill the quantities needed, because it's very expensive for one small business owner to export one container. What our clients are doing is actually exporting by the crates or the boxes, but all of their clients that they have in Canada and England will require more. But what we do need is a consortium, but we do have some level of export markets emanating from Fund Access. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. John.
Honourable Minister, my question is just a short one. Earlier in your presentation, and one of your officers would have mentioned training and business development. I want to know exactly the process in order to get involved in the training, and if this is something that can be done at community level. And I'm thinking in particular of St. John in terms of satellite areas for training.
Honourable Member, I'm going to invite Mr. Jerry Amos, who is the acting CEO of the acting general manager of the trust fund, to answer the question.
Minister. Jerry Amos, General Manager of the Barbados Trust Fund Limited. Minister, as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, the Barbados Trust Fund Limited have moved their training community base. It's just as a result of the COVID environment last year that we actually halted those training programs, and we intend as soon as next month to get back into the communities again. And as you had signaled for St. John, we will try to make St. John a priority. Our first stop, however, is St. James, which will start next month, and we will look at starting St. John as soon as possible.
Thank you, much appreciated.
I think the Honourable Member knows that I have some sentiment for the parish, so I will do my best to make sure I look after his interests.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and of course this is, other than laying private members' resolution on Tuesday, this is the first time I have entered debate since this session of Parliament started, and I, of course, in this forum and on the record of Parliament, wish to thank the constituents of St. James North, my beloved constituents, for allowing me the opportunity to represent them for the third time in these chambers. First, wish to continue with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, the trend of the debate that has been going on. The Honourable Member for St. James Central raised it, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, and of course, Honourable Member for St. Michael East, who of course is Chairman as well of the Reparations Commission, Special Envoy to the Prime Minister in that regard. But Minister, Honourable Member for St. Michael, for St. James Central, of course, you lead an extremely critical ministry in terms of your mandate for business development, for the transformation of this country, in terms of the economy, in terms of business, and in terms of society. And yes, it has been said here today by all the previous parliamentarians who I named that we need to, as we go forward, embark on, or certainly continue on, economic enfranchisement of the majority race in this country. And this Parliament, I may dare say, Mr. Chairman, has a unique opportunity at this time of our history, the third decade of the 21st century, to do so. We have been given a mandate, the Barbados Labour Party, for the second time, comprehensive mandate by the people of our country, by our constituents, to transform this society, sir. And I see this certainly as one of our mandates and of our responsibilities, because it can't be that so few people in this country have unique wealth, and that the wealth traditionally, sir, by previous governments has been increased and concretized. We have had, as has been said, instances where black businesses have done very well in the past, but have not been able to continue, and I give credit and commendation, sir, to the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, who spoke for the first time today in these chambers, and is a member of a family, one of the few black families in this country that can trace its success business-wise through generations. We know that we've had professionals, whether lawyers, doctors, engineers, architects, yes, black people who have done well, but that doesn't bring real wealth and continuation and mobilization of capital and wealth.
Honourable Member, would you please pose the question?
I need to ask the question, sir. Yes, sir. If you could just give me a little more latitude, I can come to the question, sir. That the Honourable Member for St. James Central, I think, hinted at it in terms of our educational policies. I mean, we have to teach people from a young age on entrepreneurship, and I trust that the new Minister of Education will also see that as part of curriculum reform. But my question, Mr. Chair, relates to, and of course, I must say this is under sub-program 0461 in the estimates under this ministry. I think we agree that it needs an all-of-government approach. And I am, even something as simple as failure of past administration, sir, because this administration has committed to paying off its debts and giving VAT returns to businesses. Even that has hindered black business development, failure of previous governments to give VAT returns which are owed. And I am wondering if the Honourable Member for St. James Central is prepared to lead and to recommend to Cabinet strategies and policies to cement succession planning in black-owned businesses in this country. Because I think we've had a lot of talk traditionally on this issue, and as I said, this government has been given a mandate to transform. We have committed in our manifesto to transform society and economy. And I know that the Honourable Member who leads this ministry has the capacity to take up this mantle. And I'm wondering if his ministry is prepared to do that so that we could have greater depth one way or another. Giving of government contracts, yes, because this is an area in which wealth is created, and even affirmative action, as we have done in terms of legislation. I think it was in December 2018, whereby 3% of government contracts, procurements are given to communities, given to persons with disabilities, and just asking Honourable Minister if he and his ministry are prepared to take the lead, because it encompasses other ministries too on this issue. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the question, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you had me at a little bit of a disadvantage because your question was, it took a long time to come, and it was almost unwieldy, but you touched a number of important points, and in structuring an initial comment, I would want to just follow the thinking. The liquor licenses and vendors bill, in my judgment, were opportunities for us to speak to the legislative effort that this government could make at that time, and has in fact now made, with regard to correcting, in the case of liquor licenses regime, decades, and in the case of the vendors regime, as we just heard, hundreds of years of inequity in the system, which have worked to the detriment of ordinary small business people in particular. In the liquor licenses case, we asked people to leave their place of business to go and stand up in a magistrate's courtyard, in some instances for a whole day. When I was first given the file to peruse on this particular matter, it came to my understanding that there were instances where 90 or 100 cases were supposed to be heard in the magistrate's court, but only 30 or 40 would have been heard. And after an entire day, those extra 70 or 60 people were just sent on their way to come back again. And in each case, those are business people who have been taken away from their business and asked to endure that type of indignity, now being corrected. Administratively, obviously, I am privileged to be at the head of a ministry that is creating almost revolutionary opportunities where they did not exist when you were at school, nor when I, who are a little bit younger than you, were at school, so that there's training now in new skills, and new businesses are opening with respect to renewable energy and all of the services associated therewith. more directly to the question that you asked in terms of affirmative action, we created a cooperative movement. I think the Honourable Member for St. George South would have been the minister at the time that the work was done. I was the minister at the time that it was carried over the line, and the Builders and Artisans Cooperative, that is not the correct name, but that is what they do. That was created, and part of my position has been, and will continue to be, against all opposition, that the affirmative action approach should be taken, and that where there is work in the construction sector that government can provide, then let that cooperative be at the table, because that is really what we are here for. And it makes no sense, in my judgment, creating a cooperative body of that nature, bringing artisans and contractors and builders together, and not for us to take the next logical step, which is to do everything we can to empower them so that they can be the people who move the earth to please of tomorrow, for want of a better way of putting it. But more specifically, I think that what you are also speaking about falls directly within the context of the financial literacy program, because we begin in secondary schools, primary schools. Hopefully by September, we will be party to the curriculum reform, which must take place. The dialogue is already begun between the two ministries, but we want to be able to make sure that our young people are introduced at an early stage to what financial literacy is about. But as you go through this process, you understand that there are two key themes that touch your concern, sir. First is the question of succession planning, and very closely linked to that is business continuity. Some people choose to define business continuity in very restricted terms, saying, well, this is really about the aftermath of a disaster or whatever, and how you keep the business going. But it has to be broader than that. It has to be about your continuing a business, or planning the succession of the leadership of the business onto the next generation and the next generation. And as we saw celebrated yesterday, if it is not only family, you come to a point where it will be run entirely by people who have nothing to do with the originating family, but the business still succeeds. And that is where I think we have to lift the horizon of all Barbadians, the view of the horizon, the view of the business horizon to all Barbadians. I would want to invite P.S. Blackman to speak to this issue, and if in her judgment there are one or two other officers, then that will be relevant to, or being of assistance. She could do so.
Thank you, Minister. Certainly, as I listen to the discussions that has obtained so far, when you look at the whole continuum of business, persons oftentimes may use vending, for instance, as an incubator to test an idea, so that they can have an appreciation of what is the response of the market to the idea that they have birthed. And then that business grows, become a micro business, and then go to the next continuum of being a small business, and then medium-sized business to large. So what the ministry is engaged in at this time, having recognized that continuum, developing a set of services, utilizing standards from at the very inception, that these businesses, the quality of it will transcend them from just being a micro business right through to a large-sized businesses where they are now operating in the export market. So the work goes from micro right through to building an environment to allow these businesses to grow and expand. And then now you're positioning them to just have life after the owner, where the other through education, those other elements of understanding that you can have other investments in the business, that it is not necessarily also to grow it through debt, but you can grow it through equity financing. And if there is a desire not to have that type of financing forevermore, that there's also an escape route, really, that the owner can also have at their disposal. So the challenge where we recognize black businesses oftentimes just live for one generation, maybe two. And some of them have been very, very good businesses that has not outlived the owner, because we have used it really as a means to an end. And oftentimes you would hear us, or those owners may say, I don't want you to get involved in this type of business, but I would prefer you to get engaged in some other type of profession. Again, that is the language that needs to change. And part of it will come through training and orienting persons on what lies beyond a first generation business and the types of tools they can engage to help them move beyond first generation. And part of that is the succession planning that we in the ministry, through business continuity, we've had some vibrant discussions on this, because we have been looking at it certainly beyond what are the methods or systems that we would need to put in place to allow for businesses to recover if there is a disaster. But we recognize that the succession planning is certainly integral to the part, because the business closing at the end of the first generation is tantamount to a disaster. So you want to have these businesses live beyond, and that's part of the policy programming that the ministry will be executing over the next year. And in fact, I do have my business development advisor, Anderson Cumberbatch, who can share more of this. So I would ask him to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, PS, as well as the Minister. Chair, my name is Anderson Cumberbatch. I'm the Chief Business Development Advisor within the Ministry. I believe the question speaks to the nexus between an affirmative action model, as I would put it, as well as succession planning and business continuity. And I see a solution at both of the levels of training with respect to the financial literacy program, as well as providing a policy and legislative framework. Why do I say training at the level of the Financial Literacy Bureau? I know that, for example, there are plans to have succession planning incorporated into this program, as well as some element of business continuity. The statistics show that there are just under 4,000 persons who would have been impacted as relates to training under the Financial Literacy Bureau. And while we would have done such programs as how do we budget for family life and costing of products and services and so on, and debt management, I know that there are also plans to include corporate governance, how do we manage our credit cards, tax planning, and certainly succession planning and business continuity. As the PS would have indicated, we would have had some robust discussions as it relates to business continuity. It is my view that we need to address the issue of the next set of next generation businesses, both at the level of business continuity. There's that thought that business continuity is only about how do we mitigate the effects of natural disasters, but it's also as it relates to how do we deal with facilitating those next generation businesses. So this is one of the initiatives that we're going to look at going forward. But the issue can also be addressed at the level of the legislation. And I know within the context of the national policy, it also spoke to how do we address such issues as allowing our businesses to grow, to go from, for example, from micro to small to medium, and the graduation process. And I just want to use that as an example, the recommendation for what we consider to be a micro business. A micro business, according to what is being recommended, would be one where the employees are just less than 5, the annual sales less than 500,000, and the investment less than 100,000. Well, for small businesses, there are less than 30 employees, annual sales of less than 3 million, and investment less than 1 million. And then medium enterprises, less than 100 employees, the annual sales less than 8 million, and the investments less than 3 million. So we are trying to develop a number of strategies so that businesses can graduate from micro to small to medium, and along the business life cycle to provide a number of interventions, relevant interventions, so that the whole notion of small businesses, we don't want to classify them in terms of race and so on, because to my mind, whether you are a black business or otherwise, you have some inherent challenges. I know that there are other challenges that may occur, but within the context of planning for businesses, we need to address them within a particular context where we want to provide those interventions along the business life cycle. So therefore, within the legislation that we're looking at, we are amending the current policy. There are some initiatives that we want to put in place there,
Sir,
and this is going to inform.
I will ask you to wrap up your response.
Okay, this is going to inform the legislation. So in answer to that question, I think it can be addressed at the level of training and certainly at the level of policy and legislative interventions. I want to thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would just utilize one of my 2 permitted follow-ups. Firstly, on the issue of...
Honourable Member, before you proceed, we are a bit pressed for time, so I would ask you to get as quickly as possible to the question so that we can proceed. We have 3 other honourable members who will make a contribution. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, like I said, I would only utilize one. Well, the issue of the natural gas, and I was happy to see the Honourable Minister speak about the challenges of that and the alternatives that we're looking at. But on the issue of CAIPO, sir, the corporate registry, sub-program 0491, I note that $3 million, over $3 million less is being given to it in these estimates than was given last year. I see that, sir, as a lot of the computerization went on last year, $4.2 million in transitioning to a digital solution, and therefore only $1 million budgeted for this year. But my question is to the head of the department, I think Ms. Rochester, as to expanding a bit. I know she spoke a bit earlier, but really and truly, how does all of this assist the ordinary business person in terms of facilitation of ease of doing business? Because we all know, especially lawyers, accountants, professional small business persons, the difficulty which traditionally CAIPO, people have had in dealing with CAIPO. I mean, you hear that if the T is uncrossed, is rejected, or the I dotted, and ease of doing business is what this government has come into office to deal with, making it easier both for our citizens and non-citizens to do business. And how will these changes translate in terms of peace of mind to ordinary people in getting their business done at CAIPO on a more speedy basis? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon again, Chairman and members. To answer your question briefly, I will say the benefits to the small business person and to the large business person all boil down to ease, efficiency, speed, and being able to transact your business in a convenient manner in keeping with the way how business is done across the globe in the 21st century. Now, the digital system is the portal by which the investors and businesses, both domestic and external, will be able to access our registry and navigate their way through the relevant processes. It replaces the traditional method of filing paper and creating mountains of paper with the technology that is available to us today to allow you to progress your matters quickly, avoiding the pitfalls, as you would have indicated, in the past where because of, sorry, my apologies, I was distracted. So where in the past, because of the method of filing and processing, everything took 10 times longer than it needed to be. And this is what we kept in mind when we looked for a system that would suit our needs, but more importantly, the needs of the business persons. So for example, we are now live with phase 1, and that phase, as I indicated earlier, encompasses the new entities, forming new entities, new business names, new incorporations, etc. It is simply the click of a button whereby you can fill that application, submit that application, pay for that application, and track the status of that application as it moves through the process. And that also has been one of the shortcomings throughout the years of KIPO, and I would think any system dependent on a manual type of processing, because of the volume of filings, it is, I don't want to say impossible, but very close there too, for the tracking and the that continuous dialogue with the customer in terms of the status of their applications and the status of their matters. And that has added considerably to the delay. So with the new system that we have, you get real-time notifications, you get email notifications, pop-ups, etc., that alert you as it goes through the process. And we also see the documents real-time. So whereby previously we would have had paper coming in at the cashier point, being distributed the next day to officers who had to go and physically pull files and do that type of manual processing. As soon as you click submit, the officers see it, and they can process it at the same time. And I would have provided some statistics in terms of how we were doing so far, where I said we had processed a total of 1,606 filings, and 80% of them we were able to respond to, process, or deal with the same day within a matter of hours. And of those, we have had 828 business names over the past 3 months registered successfully on the system, and dealt with all within the same day or the next day, with the customer being able to log into an account and see and track that progress and also dialogue with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me begin. I know time is of essence, so I won't be too long in my preamble. But first, let me begin by congratulating the members of the Ministry of Energy and Business Development for the sterling work they continue to do in this country in those two key sectors, business development and energy. And I also want to congratulate the minister. The minister has been a stellar performer, between 2018 and present. And I cut my teeth in that Ministry of Small Business, and I want to say that the officers in there, they continue to perform. But I move into the question, and while I move into the question, I recognize comments coming from Director of Insolvency Supervisor, Miss Springer, and also comments coming from the head of the Trust Loan Unit, and you know how I feel about that unit. But within the estimates, I looked on the business development sub-program 0461, and I saw on the professional services 226 that you're allocating fees to an advisor for the Financial Literacy Bureau. And we spent a lot of time, I would say, in patches this afternoon mentioning the Financial Literacy Bureau. But my question to you, Minister, and to your team, what is the master plan and the rollout plan for the Financial Literacy Bureau? I have not heard a master plan or a rollout plan, and I would premise the question on saying that it has to be community-based, and I did recognize the comments from the supervisor of insolvency and the head of the general manager of the Trust Loan Unit. But I would like to hear about the master plan for the Financial Literacy Bureau that is so needed in this country, having heard those comments. And the comments were noted, and they were very good comments from both managers this afternoon. So over to you, Minister, and thank you again for the good work that you're doing on behalf of this government.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and in the interest of coming straight to the root of the matter, I will ask P.S. Blackman to outline for you what you describe as the master plan.
Thank you, Minister. The Financial Literacy Bureau is doing sterling work in terms of educating entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs on many elements of doing business. The ministry recognizes there's such a demand for that type of assistance, that type of education, that we have sat in a few planning meetings to look at how we can restructure this to broaden even the reach. The type of subjects also matter to be discussed and presented through there. We recognize that the work in the ministry has a direct opportunity for some of the areas of contention, those areas that are of much concern, can be addressed through that infrastructure. And the intention is to broaden much of the subjects done there. We also plan to introduce additional experts. We have had a great interest from persons in the insurance industry, for instance, who believes that they can also add value as part of the financial literacy dialogue that is taking place. And we plan to add them to the subjects being taught. And it is being done not from the perspective of selling or trading products in the insurance industry, but certainly to educate small business persons on the benefits and some of the challenges that can occur if they don't have that type of financial instrument in place. But not only that, but also to look at some of what can occur, reading the fine print, so to speak, if they have such types of challenges, and then there's a particular eventuality occurring in the business that may require them to call on that same instrument. These are some of sometimes we do it because someone would have said to us, you need to take this package, without fully understanding the implications of subscribing to that type of instrument. So the intention is to broaden that. We also expect that we will add additional facilitators. And we also recognize that there is a strategic linkage between the work being administered there and what is being offered through the National Training Initiative, NTIE. There are some courses we feel that further deepening of the subject matter may not be accommodated through the Financial Literacy Bureau, but certainly can be done then through the NTI, where it may be a week-long training or 2 weeks, and that is how NTI has been constructed, and the Financial Literacy Bureau has not been designed in that particular way. So the intention is to forge that linkage, and in fact, we do have a meeting with them coming up. The expectation is on Friday to address how we can work more collaboratively and there provide the kind of impetus that we may not be able to do, have training available 24/7, and not simply when the facilitators are administering the particular course on a particular day at a particular time. So the intention now is to move it into a realm where you can learn at your own pace. You can go back, go forward, stop a tape if you don't understand a particular concept, that it would be available to you now 24/7. So that is part of the direction that we want to take the Financial Literacy Bureau. The intention is to have also a meeting with the pioneers, the persons who would have conceptualized this at the very beginning, to also get their input on how we can further strategize and map out the way forward to strengthen it, because we recognize that there is a strong demand. Reports have told us persons have logged in from places all in New Zealand, Australia. There are certainly Barbadians living in those areas. And we've had feedback through the reports coming from the social media person who help us to do the advertising, using that medium to reach persons. And there is a strong interest, and we want to tap into that market too. There are persons who can bring further value to what is being shared, who have strengths and expertise in these areas, in different areas that will be of interest to what our Barbadian entrepreneurs and small business persons can take to help strengthen and grow their businesses. So these are some of the plans that we have in train, and those will be fleshed out as we, over the next month, 2 months, as we start the new financial year. Thank you.
A follow-up question? You have a follow-up question, Honourable? No.
Mr. Chair, based on time, I'm going to allow, but just to say, just a comment that we need to utilize community centers more. I thought that the Minister of Youth was going there, but he said St. John. I don't have any difficulty. We all will put a plug for all of our constituencies. But I would like to see the utilization of community centers across the length and breadth of this country as we seek to roll out this plan. I will give way to my other colleagues who, based on time.
If I could just briefly make one observation on that point, Chair. There's no difficulty at all in my mind with the suggestion that we use the community centers. The truth of the matter is, when this program was first conceptualized, that is what we were doing. And indeed, the Honourable Member's constituency had been earmarked for a couple of early ones. So keen are this staff on the relationship that they enjoyed with the Honourable Member when he was their minister. But then COVID happened upon us, and the reality is that for practical reasons, we wanted to keep the program alive, but could not do the in-person training, and that's when we shifted it to an online platform. And as PS quite rightly points out, we have impacted 4,000 people via their access in the online training, and I think it is 1,300 in person, something like that. So that there has obviously been a significant buy-in to the online way of delivering it, but it is worth us looking at to see, now that we are about to enter, or what I hope we are doing is entering a post-COVID environment, whether we can have a blend of the two. But certainly for ease of access, the online platform is the preferable and obviously the more economically feasible one method of adopting the process of teaching. What will obviously have to happen in person is when we get to the schools. It is a conversation I need to have with this new Minister of Education. But certainly the thinking is that we will benefit from some tweaks to the curriculum so as to facilitate in primary and secondary school, which will obviously be an online exercise, at least for the most part, I think.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair, Mr. Chair. A comment and then a question prefaced on my view that representatives and indeed the public service has an overriding responsibility to those who are vulnerable and who need the hand holding, the hand up, or whatever it is that would be required to assist because they may not be in a position to assist themselves. My question has to do with consumer affairs under subhead 480, I think it is. But the comment I want to make before that also speaks to what I consider vulnerability. And I'm reflecting on a comment I heard in a submission from an officer earlier in relation to the idea of maybe not identifying specifically black businesses. And I would want to suggest that while we don't want to discriminate unduly, there is a need to recognize that there are peculiar circumstances surrounding the development of specific groups in any society, and Barbados as a society that has come out of maybe the most brutal form of chattel slavery. There is a need to take into consideration, and I would probably repeat it to say there is a need to take into serious consideration the fact that black businesses have not evolved in the same way as businesses from other people types. And so while it may be convenient and it may feel non-discriminatory to say, well, we're dealing with businesses, all small businesses, it is necessary for there to be some kind of underlying philosophy, something that understands the historical development of a group that ought to guide the policy making that is intended to lift that group and take it to another plane, a higher plane. But the question in that same vein of vulnerability, a pretty simple question is just to ask under subhead 480, what is the ministry's plan in relation to consumer protection? We've heard a lot about inflationary pressures. Minister, early on you spoke to the geopolitical developments in the far northern Europe, well, yeah, the Russian and Ukrainian situation. The question is, what is it, given what is already happening and what is on the horizon, that the ministry is doing under this head? In other words, when a person from Spitestone or Boscobel or Blackbess asks me, why are we voting money for consumer protection? What is it that they're doing? What is the response that you can give to me that I can share with them?
A number of areas arise in answer to your question, Minister, which touch on a variety of areas of this ministry's work. The Fair Trade Commission works in that regard through its Office of Public Counsel, the Supervisor of Insolvency, obviously has indicated the work that she's doing. The Director of Commerce, I believe, has already hinted at some of the things he has done. We will speak more fully, but let me just say that at the outset, I want to make it very clear based on your preliminary statement that while you may have heard a reticence or a reluctance to articulate the assistance which we offer in the terms of racial phenotype from the person who was speaking at the time, there is in the mind of the senior minister only pellucid clarity on this matter. There is no doubt whatsoever from where I sit that there is a serious intervention and set of interventions that must be made and be targeted towards businesses which are of Afro-Caribbean derivation, Afro-Barbadian derivation, and all of the sociological reasons attendant therewith, I am very clear on. Having said that, that is not to speak in the language of discrimination, because all businesses in Barbados have to be treated to. And there are, in fact, a number of businesses which we have had to deal with, which are of other forms of extraction in terms of the ownership and derivation of the business. P.S. Blackman, I would seek your guidance as to how best we could answer the minister's question more specifically, because he has asked for clarity on the efforts of the department of an approach which covers plurality of departments. Okay, perhaps we could have the Department of Commerce first, and then the FTC secondly. Mr. Bertram Johnson.
Yes, good afternoon, Minister. And thank you, Minister, for the question. When I first took the floor, I spoke particularly to the commerce pillar. I will now try to treat to the consumer arm, which is also the other side of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. At the outset, what I would say is that we are seeking to have a more structured approach to the whole area of consumerism. And this will require all the entities within the ministry, and the minister would have alluded to them, including the Public Council, the FTC. We do have a small claims tribunal that actually looks after the interests of consumers, and also the Department of Commerce, who has a mandate also to look at the protection of commerce. And what we are seeking to do in this fiscal period is to develop a modern consumer agenda or policy that would treat to a lot of the issues that we witnessed in our COVID experience, the things that we would have grappled with. And I think that we have a better understanding of the consumer issues, and there are certain types of mechanisms that we will be seeking to put in place to ensure that consumers and business, for example, are well informed. Basically also to safeguard consumer rights and interests, especially the vulnerable, and we spoke a lot about that today, the vulnerable groups in society. We're also looking to modernize and harmonize consumer protection legislation. So when we speak about unfair contract terms that we heard earlier, how do we deal squarely with those kinds of issues, and how do we address them in a responsible way, but also in a timely manner? We also look to encourage and promote the development of independent consumer advocacy body, and I think that is a gap, if we have to really be honest, that is missing in the Barbados economy, to have an independent consumer advocacy body that will work with all the tenants of the ministry with responsibility for consumer matters. So we're looking within the consumer agenda to also make provisions for that advocacy body, to initiate and foster collaborative actions between the consumer protection agencies, on which I spoke to earlier, and to create basically economic efficiency, looking at the demand and supply sides of it. So if I would speak specifically to the question, one of the areas that the Department of Commerce look at is particularly within pricing. And we know that this is an area within the COVID where people are complaining that there is the movement of prices. Now, some can be justified because it can be imported inflation. We have a high propensity to consume a lot of what we eat, and therefore the pass-through effects sometimes land in our economy. But is that enough? We do have a mechanism, and I want to say that we have invested recently in a modern data analytics framework, while we monitor the prices at 22 supermarkets across the breadth of Barbados. I'm looking at over 299 items, which we will relook and try to revise to make sure that those items are still consistent with the palates of Barbadians. We have invested in such a framework so that we can inform our minister and PS respectively of the movements of prices on a monthly basis. And why is that important? Because we're able to make some comparatives to see exactly where those movements are. Are they great movements? Are they marginal movements? Or are they just flat? And in that regard, this information now, or this data analytics framework, would not only allow us when consumers complain to look back into the matrix to see if what their claims are actually what it is, or is it just a case, for example, and I would just use this example in the COVID period, we had a case where, and most persons populated on social media, where they went to a particular entity and this product was way beyond the margin of what it was sold. When the department investigated, we did meet with the proprietor, we investigated, and we realized that based on their claims, it was a pricing error within their pricing system. They made a public response and apologized, and they also made corrective actions in terms of the remedy for persons to come to them to reimburse to the price in which they should have reasonably be paid because of the error they made. Therefore, the monitoring mechanism allows us to provide the protection cover to the consumers so that we can do the investigation, and we can also, where possible, urge persons to be reliable traders. But we want to go even further in this fiscal period than just collecting the data. But we want to make sure, for example, if there is claims that a particular product, let's say beef, has gone up by more than 10%, which the system will show, we will need to find out what is causing or what's driving that movement. And what we're looking to do is to interface with our Executor World system, in which we have already onboarded our inspectors and officers to work in for the import license side, but we're also looking on the trade data side, how we can extrapolate that data to then work backwards to see, okay, if a person is selling a product at, say, $35, and when we if you understand their margins in terms of 20-30% margins, if you understand their CIF, the cost insurance freight, and we work backwards, we should be able to come with a regional estimation of what this price should be selling in Barbados. That would give us a clear indication of whether the pricing in the market is actually set at what it ought to be, given all the variables that I just spoke about. So therefore, it's more than just monitoring, but to provide intelligence so that we can adequately cover the consumer in a very practical way through our modern data analytics framework. In terms of the metrology that we spoke about, we also know the verification of pumps, and we discussion this afternoon and this morning particularly was on the energy, the movements of energy prices, and therefore the pass-through effects sometimes go to the consumer. We have to make sure that the pumps are verified. And so therefore the verification marks, and it'll be a robust educational program in this fiscal period to apprise people of what their rights as well as their responsibilities should be. And therefore when they go and they don't see a verification mark at the pump, they have a right to report that to the Department of Commerce, because we have our inspectors that actually verify the pumps to make sure that if you're paying for $20 in gas, you're actually getting $20 worth, depending on the price per liter of gas. And we believe that these are all important elements of our consumer framework agenda. It goes beyond that. I know there are other principles in here that we want to speak. For example, on fair contract terms, the FTC might want to speak to that. I want to say that we also have a small claims tribunal. Where persons have issues, they go to the public counsel for resolution. That matter, it moves from the public counsel down to a small claims tribunal led by a chair and a tribunal where that is adjudicated and where there need to be remediation or remedies, and that mechanism so dispatch that. So going into the next fiscal period, there's a suite of consumer awareness exercises that we will be conducted. But more importantly, we'll be putting our lens on to all the consumer matters that I earlier spoke about, and to make sure that Barbadians across every breadth of society is well represented as it relates to consumer matters. I know I have my colleagues here from the FTC and other entities that would want to add to what I said, because while we work on the broader consumer agenda, there are departments within the agenda that each of us pick up to support each other so that we have a comprehensive framework as we speak to the consumer agenda issues that you've articulated. I thank you, and if I do need to make any further explanations, I will come back to do such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Johnson. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to invite Mrs. Marsha Ikichi CEO of the Fair Trade Commission to speak to this issue, and perhaps also to do so in the context of the energy sector and how the work of the Fair Trade Commission acts in the interest of consumers in that regard.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Minister, and the rest of Cabinet, as well as my colleagues here. My name is Dr. Marcia Atherley Ikechi. As the Minister said, I am the acting CEO of the Fair Trading Commission. I want to first tackle the question of consumer protection. So there are three arms of the Commission: utility regulation, fair competition, and consumer protection. Consumer protection is that arm that specifically looks after the interests of the consumers in Barbados. In doing so, the undergirding philosophy is to enable consumers, to understand their rights and responsibilities. We believe at the Fair Trading Commission that when that is done, we set the playing ground for the proper engagement to take place. We recognize at the same time that a consumer coming up against a business, that is a difficult undertaking because the business would have the wherewithal to challenge, while the individual consumer will not invariably have the same tools at its disposal. So us at the Commission, we do engagement at the one-on-one level where we seek redress for an individual consumer, but we really prefer to do it at a collective level. So if there is an issue, for example, something in telecoms, for example, we want to bring about that behavioral change that allows for change and sustain behavioral change over time, as opposed to one person coming to the Commission and having that their particular matter addressed, but we recognizing oftentimes it is that multiple persons were maybe experiencing the same particular issue. So that's one thing. One of the things that we're actively engaging at this point is looking at banking contracts. Recognize that most of us have bank accounts in one form or fashion, and that because we focus on that area, then we can affect change for a significant number of persons. So that is something that we are pretty much at a very advanced stage in doing, and you should see that bearing fruit in short order. The other thing that we're looking at is a telecoms code that, again, has broad reach, and that really is across the mobile and data sector of the telecoms, because utility regulation is really focused on landline service, and that's because the utility regulations specify that particular thing, and that's for cable and wireless only. On the consumer protection, we're able to address some of the issues on a broader range, and that's what we're doing. So those are some of the areas that we really want to focus in on, but beyond that, we recognize that there are certain lacunas in the legislation. The legislation is, about 20 years old, as long as the Commission existed. Technology has advanced considerably, and therefore we need to advocate to bring about that change. In some instances, we are moving toward that. There was a cabinet paper that was approved in 2019, I believe, that looks at setting standards across the board for all telecoms providers. That would therefore bring Digicel into the fore, and we'll be able to look at contract terms, roaming charges, all those types of things. The delivery, the drop calls, all of those types of things then would be addressed under that provision. That, again, is something in train. We're not to the point of rolling out. We have to then engage CPC on that. But those are type of the general things that we're doing. There's also enforcement. The Commission, again, has been in existence for 20 years, and we've taken the decision to move from public awareness and education to enforcement. So you will see the Commission begin to move to prosecute companies where they are recalcitrant in terms of heeding the direction of the Commission. It is not going to be a one fell swoop type of operation, but it is after engagement where we recognize that persons are not compliant. We will use the legislation as given to ensure that we provide that level playing field or that fair playing field for our consumers. Was there a specific question on energy that you wanted to raise? Minister, you brought up energy, but you didn't specifically say.
Only very generally, Doctor. I was thinking along the lines of the PPA work that you have done recently, which is ensuring a fair rate for energy providers.
Okay, so the PPA really is the purchase power agreement. That is the agreement that investors, renewable energy investors, will take to the bank to provide financing. It also determines the rights and responsibilities between the two parties, the supplier and the off-taker. We are currently devising the PPA for the 1 to 10 megawatt capacity segment. That is something that we are working with stakeholders on. The Commission is required to engage stakeholders when it comes to any major decisions such as this. We are to the point where we've received, I believe, 12 submissions across basically 3 sectors: investors, international banking sector, as well as the local banking sector, and institutions like BRI and the like. So once we have fully analyzed those submissions, we'll make a determination as to how we go forward, what exactly is placed in that template PPA. And I want to stress the point that it is really a template PPA. It is intended to facilitate the process for the sector. So when we say a PPA, it is not something that each entity is compelled to sign onto. It allows persons to use that. It will be modified based on each individual project, but it is intended not to have to renegotiate it from scratch, but it's just a tool to push the process forward. We recognize full well, but they have a target. We heard earlier this morning that the target might shift a little bit, but we recognize though that there's a target 7-8 years away. There's a lot of work to be done in the area. So if we are to do that, then we must utilize the tools that would allow us to do that in the most efficient manner. Using a template PPA as a starting point will allow us to get to that point. We would not have to go back and negotiate every single clause of the PPA, but there are certain things that are standard that we will move forward with. There'll be tweaks depending on the type of project, the capacity of the project, possibly the location of the project. Because, for example, if I have a project in St. Andrew and there are no substations in close proximity, the cost of interconnecting for that particular project as opposed to one on Spring Garden will be vastly different. And those things have to be taken into account when you are signing a PPA, because that impacts the actual price of that project. Firm capacity project will also be very different to one that is variable. Variable meaning using solar and wind, as opposed to firm meaning using biogas or hydrogen or one of those other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Minister, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Minister. I speak on behalf of my constituents who I represent when I sit in this place. I'm happy with both the continuing work of the ministry, and I am heartened by the response. I think the consumers I represent are looking forward to the educational initiatives, as well as the consumer body, and learning about how the analytics spoken about will assist them. So thank you very much, and thanks to the 2 officers, Mr. Johnson and Dr. Adelaide Kitchi. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Allow me first to start by commending the Minister and his team so far from what has been an excellent presentation and representation of their ministry. I just have a few questions, and I'm going to make them very, very brief. Mr. Amos, you had initially said that, indicated there was going to be some cutback on the program for the trust loans because of the funds funds constraints. I just want some idea of what is available and what categories are you all looking at pushing, because a number of people have reached out to me, and I guess because of how things are now, there's a strong push to come off of the dependence on government and to encourage entrepreneurial behavior. So I'm just wondering, as what are you all concentrating on, and how easy would it be for people to access these funds? That's one. In relation to the electric mobility, Minister, I know we're supposed to be going to 100% renewable for generation of energy by 2030, and I'm passing a question on. Somebody wants to know, are we looking to incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles, and how do we plan to actually break the Barbadian dependence on fossil fuel vehicles and push to more electric vehicles in the marketplace? Is this something that we should be looking at, some incentive scheme to expedite that transition? And the last question is in relation to KIPO. When are we looking at KIPO getting effectively fully functional online? When are we looking to be able to incorporate a company and get everything done in relation to incorporating a company within a 24-hour space or 48 hours at the maximum? If we're trying to be competitive in the sector, then we need to be able to complete the total registration of a company in a short space of time to compete with the others who are in that market space as well. So those are the three questions in a nutshell, and I'll leave it right there.
Thank you very much for the question, Minister. I just want to make it clear, when I spoke about the cutbacks, I was speaking about the cutbacks as it relates to our strategic plan. Our strategic plan for 2022-2023 was to disburse 1,200 loans. And again, we said that based on the restraints, we would actually try to do at least $4 million in loans. So I am not seeing an immediate issue. As it relates to the sectors that we'll be concentrating on, we're paying special emphasis on innovation, manufacturing, agriculture, and we want at this time to get back into tourism, since there seems to be an ease in the tourism market, and we have actually stopped those loans for quite some time.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, to the question on the incentivization of the purchase of electric vehicles, I am aware that a paper had gone to Cabinet which looks at the tax implications of that move. I suspect that the Honourable Minister will recall the presentation of that paper. What I would want to do is to invite the Permanent Secretary in that division of the Ministry, PS Andrew Gittins, and if need be, any other officer of his choosing, to speak to the question of the tax findings and the likelihood of incentivization. Of course, bearing in mind that the final decision on incentivization does not lie with the Ministry of Energy, but rather with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs.
Mr. Chairman and members of the House, and thank you, Minister. The Ministry is aware, and we're working on this whole policy of electric mobility. This is a critical part of the agenda to transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. And in terms of the issue, Mr. Haynes, who's here, who worked a lot on that tax policy, he will come and speak to it because he was dealing with it in more detail to spell out what parts it did. But the whole issue of whether we can incentivize the sector is really not a matter for the Ministry of Energy, but rather the Ministry of Finance. What I can say is that we would have formed a committee of stakeholders consisting of persons from the petroleum industry, car dealers, both new and old, and the the private sector persons involved in transport, and we did a policy in which I'm shortly going to submit to the minister, and we hopefully go to cabinet, where we recognize that as a way of moving this industry forward, there will be needs for some level of incentives, because you know the price of the electric vehicles is pretty high, and we believe that there need to be some level of incentives, but that is not a matter that we have final determination on. What I would also like to say at this stage, we also recognize that the 2030 cutoff point may be difficult to achieve, not because of a lack of will, but we recognize that even in terms of, the minister made reference this morning, there's some types of transport type of equipment that they're not really available in electric yet. And the other issue is that even where they're available, the suppliers and the dealers here have indicated that they were told by the manufacturers that the Caribbean region as a taker, we are not going to be getting that at that stage. So we really have to do some work, and we have to really see how we're going to reorganize and restructure what we're doing in terms of transport. But we recognize it as a critical component, and I just want to say that while we see it as a part of the solution, and we have a policy which I said I'm going to send to the minister and shortly go to cabinet, hopefully if he agree, to see how we can incentivize the sector. We also recognize that the other aspect of it is that we are looking at other modalities, and we think that the whole issue of retrofitting existing the fleet of vehicles, because we have 130,000 plus vehicles in Barbados, and we normally change over about 6,000 a year. We really can't change over all these vehicles in the next 6 or 7 years. And our policy really is looking at now, how do we take these existing vehicles and use clean fuels, biofuels and biodiesels and things like this to keep these vehicles in place, so we will have a whole number of stranded assets in terms of vehicles, as well as the stations, and as well as the refinery that we operate at, but the Barbados National Oil Company Limited. So these are some of the issues we're going to work on, and we hope shortly to have this matter to the minister and to cabinet, and then obviously the details can be made. But at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Brian Haynes, the Chief Project Analyst. He would have been involved with working on that paper on the taxation side, to give a little outline on, for you.
Thank you, PS. Good afternoon, colleagues and members of the House. My name is Brian Haynes. I'm the Chief Project Analyst in the Ministry of Energy and Business Development. Fundamentally, when we started work on the energy policy, one of the concerns that was raised within the sector was that the government had a high dependency in terms of revenue from fossil fuels for transport. And that was seen as one of the areas that we would impact in a very heavy way. Indeed, we did that work starting back in 2018, thereabouts, with the assistance of the IADB, and that work was also ably assisted by the University of West Indies through Dr. Moore. We more or less came to the conclusion that the impact to revenues to government was around 300 million if we went to a full 100% by 2030. And therefore there was a concern, or consideration I should say, that the Ministry of Finance had to address in terms of its public finance, and to make sure that once we started to move more and more vehicles from fossil fuels, gasoline and diesel, that there would be some planning that would have to be done to address those issues. And we did that work, and we advised, we had discussions at the level of the subcommittee of the cabinet, and we presented, that was then presented to the cabinet. There were a number of recommendations that came out in terms of addressing the loss and the impact that may have that may occur. Some of which will incur like mileage taxation, that kind of thing, as well as areas in terms of looking at efficiency within the government sector to address any areas of cost and so on. Because we recognize that as we move towards renewables, the government itself will also benefit from the move towards renewables as they move towards EVs, as you would have seen in the transport sector, the transport board, as well as their move towards electrification in the transport fleet, which was put to the cabinet as well to address the transition towards renewables. So there are those considerations that were just to outline some of them, because we recognize that there are those two critical areas of making sure that governments, the impact of government, as well as the impact to the consumer, and to make sure that we have a balance in terms of the effects of the move towards renewables. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Chairman, the last question, if I recall correctly, and forgive me, they came so quickly I did not have a chance to take a full note, but I do recognize that it did touch and concern KIPO, and I would want to invite PS Jennifer Hunt in the International Business Division of the Ministry to speak to that matter, or to designate the appropriate officer so to do.
Thank you, Minister. And good evening, Chairman and members. Mrs. Tamisha Rochester, the Acting Registrar of KIPO, will respond to your question.
Thank you, PS. Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon again to the Chairman and the members. I believe the first question was when we were looking to be fully digitalized or fully live with our digital system. And I can say to you that we are expecting to have all the services under this project on board in June this year, so that is June 2022. The next question related to having, I believe it was filings back within a 24 to 48 hour period. In my submissions earlier, I would have indicated that we're to the stage where we provide a response on the same day in 80% of the cases of the filings done so far on the online system. And we are already in a position where we are processing incorporations, business names on the same day once they're in a state to be processed. Now, I would have mentioned earlier in my first submission, I believe it is, we did acknowledge that we had a few teething issues, as would be expected with any new IT system coming on board, things that obviously would have popped up, as it does sometimes with technology, that would have been causing us issues initially, and we were working around the clock to ensure that they were settled and they were fixed as these things were brought to our attention. And we may have had some instances where certain things that would seem minor to us but required a fix in the background of the IT. But it was a matter of them being addressed, and they were addressed speedily once they were brought to our attention. So we are in a position where persons are getting their incorporations in 24 hours. I dare say we have some persons who get back the incorporation within 4 hours. And I think a lot of it too is that our customers, or our clients, as I will now refer to them as, are also learning the system, and they're learning their way around it and familiarizing themselves with it so that they're moving through the system quickly. And certain things they may not have picked up because it is new for them as it is new for us. As they are able to navigate better, we are able to respond quicker. So we are that is the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Member, I trust that those three answers satisfy you.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Minister, if the honourable members, if there are no more questions, Minister, we will invite you to wrap up at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It has been, as usual, a wonderful opportunity to have a discussion with you, the members of this House, and by extension, the listening public, as we try to shed a little bit more light on the substance of what we do in this ministry. I want to just emphasize one or two things which I think were highlighted during the course of the conversation that we would have had today. First of all, it is abundantly clear to me that there remains an interest in this Parliament, and I would imagine because we are hearing the voices of the people through the mouth of the representative, there remains an interest in making sure that those people who are less fortunate, less gifted with opportunity and ease of access in this community enjoy the benefit of being able to get into business and be able to benefit from partnership that allows their business endeavors to flourish and to grow, whatsoever those business endeavors may be and howsoever they may be defined. This ministry continues to keep that top of mind and as a first priority in all that we do. We're obviously a very broad ministry, and we are equally dedicated to the energy side of what is taking place in Barbados. I want to say again that I am indebted to the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, I believe it is, who raised the issue about where we are with natural gas, because it really gave me an opportunity that I needed to have, which is to be able to speak to the country a little bit about some of the challenges that we are facing. Clearly, we would want to continue, as I said, to find that sweet spot, that middle of the road area where we can, for short to medium term purposes, continue the expansion program of the National Petroleum Corporation in terms of gasification of communities in Barbados. In some cases, it is going to be practical and possible. In other cases, it is going to be a lot more difficult based on the financial challenges that we face. Part of the solution has to be found in the recommencement of the work that has to be done as a preliminary step towards doing more drilling. I think it is a reservoir study, that is what it is called, by the technical people. That is to be completed. Thereafter, depending on where we are pointed to, we can do more work in terms of the actual subsurface penetration. As I indicated before, this is a risky business. Oil and gas is a business which turns on dedicating money and taking a risk that you find that which you want to extract. We are not in a financially luxurious position right now, and therefore we have to pay very close attention to the alternative. That alternative is a cultural shift in Barbados, and again, it is one of those conversations that we're going to have with this country. There is a need for everybody to prepare themselves to participate in a renewable energy effort of some form in the not too distant future. It is not to say that every household or every business must now retrofit itself immediately, but I think we have to start to plan in the direction of doing that type of retrofitting. We are doing this because it makes sense for us to use the natural sunshine and the wind to be able to fuel our industry and our businesses. Every time there is a conflict somewhere in some part of the world that has nothing to do with us, the volatility of the oil and gas sector internationally impacts on the Barbados economy and by extension on the consumers within the Barbados economy. And that is a message that I want to make very clear. We cannot take this journey, however, without doing the things that are costless and that are sensible and simple. And for too long, we as a society have basked in the comfort of feeling that we do not have to seriously talk the language of conservation. Conservation is practiced across continental United States. They are an oil producing and exporting country. Saudi Arabia's tourism minister was here last week. He and I would have had the benefit of some conversation. And while having dinner on Friday night, he told me about conservation measures in Saudi Arabia. We will never produce the oil or gas that Saudi Arabia has, but if they speak the language of conservation, why should we not as well? And so therefore, there's a need for us to take this journey together as a people as we contemplate a number of transformations and cultural shifts. I don't want to relitigate every aspect of the conversation, Mr. Chairman, but I think that you would have picked up by now that there is much that the ministry is doing. It is a little bit of a peculiarity, I think, that we did not spend any time today on the international business sector, which really is a sector that is full of potential and not without its challenges either, but that is where we are, and we will do this another time. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all the officers, members of staff of the different departments, statutory entities, of course, my colleague minister, who were here today and gave an entire day to this effort. I think that the level of presentation and discussion was extremely high. I want to go on record as saying that I am very proud of the people that I have the privilege of leading in this regard, and I want to commend their very good and valuable work to the people of Barbados as we continue to dedicate and rededicate ourselves towards making the energy and business environment of this country as productive and wholesome as it can possibly be. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. The question is, Head 92 stands part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All members against, please say nay. Thinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again.
The question is, I do now report progress to the Speaker. Leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of the Standing Finance Committee has reported progress and asked for leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I therefore beg to move the suspension of the House until 5:30 p.m. this afternoon.
The question is that this Honourable Chairman be suspended until 5:30 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chairman stands suspended until 5:30 p.m.